Dill was standing in the overgrown garden at the back of his new home. The garden was as wild as the countryside that surrounded it. In fact, other than a small stone wall, which was half buried under moss, ivy, and ferns, there was no real way to distinguish where the garden ended and the vast expanse of wild scenery began. It was a chilly October day, and he was thinking about his sister, who had died the previous summer, and wondering where she was now. Did a part of her still exist somewhere? And if so, where? Darkness had entered his life since she left. No, it came before, didn't it? He blushed with embarrassment as he realized he'd spoken out loud to himself again. He wasn't exactly sure when this had started, but he was certain that it had only been since he'd come to the new house. That was a week ago now, but the darkness had been there before. He called it that because it made him scared at night, when he was alone in his room. But that was in the old place, wasn't it? He'd done it again. Or had he? Something strange was definitely happening to him. His mind was pulled back to the bad dreams he'd had in his old house and how alone he'd felt. He felt the same now, even when his mum and dad were with him. It seemed so long since they'd all laughed together. His parents had been sad even before Amber had passed away, and Dill had felt it whenever he'd been with them. But the sadness was different from the scary darkness. There was something more threatening about that. Only when Dill was with his old grandma did he gain any relief from the heavy feelings that hung over his family. Grandma had a way of talking that made him feel at ease with everything. Maybe he felt this simply because she did speak to him, even about Amber's death. As far as he could remember, neither of his parents had talked to him about it. Not afterwards, anyway. They had told him it was going to happen, and then there had been silence. He wondered why, as he stared ahead into a rugged wilderness. A dot appeared in the distance. It seemed to disappear and reappear every few seconds, moving in and out of the mass of heather, bracken, and gorse that covered the rolling landscape all the way to a wooded area. Soon, it was getting bigger and closer, and was moving erratically from side to side in a way that was almost hypnotic to watch. Dill smiled as it began to form into a shape, that of his big, old, floppy, bouncy, liver-and-white Springer Spaniel, Bramble, someone else who made him feel good. Dill had wanted Bramble to play with him in the garden, but every morning since they'd been in their new home, the dog had shot out of the door and dashed off into the wild terrain, where she'd played for hours before staggering back with her head drooping and her steamy tongue hanging almost all the way down to the ground. But today, Bramble seemed to know that Dill needed her. It was almost as if they could talk to each other from a distance in a language that needed no words. He always knew either just before she wanted to go out or when she was coming home. He knew when she was hungry and when she wanted to play. And in return, she seemed to know when he was afraid at night or when he felt sad, and she would slap big kisses all over his face or sit up on her back legs to make him giggle. In fact, Dill had noticed that lately the dog was more attached to him than ever before. She had begun to show him more affection and had started to sleep by his bed. When his parents had gone to bed, she would even get into bed with him and snuggle tightly into his body until he fell asleep to the gentle rhythm of her breathing. It was as if she was standing guard for him, making sure that no scary darkness could enter his room. He turned to look at the house for a moment, and noticed that even though the sun was shining all around it on this crisp autumn morning, it seemed to be covered by a cloud. It reminded him that inside the cottage, everything was dark. Even his parents seemed to be covered in a dusty grey powder. It had begun to form around them just before his sister had gone into hospital for the last time.